I offer $1,000. It was $500, now it's $1,000 to any woman who could beat me in a wrestling match.
He read The Great Gatsby to bored audiences. He wrestled women and called himself a champion. He slept in a sleeping bag on stage as his entire act. Was this comedy or madness? TV executives couldn't decide. Audiences couldn't either. His stunts pushed beyond normal boundaries. One day, he'd appear shy and gentle. The next, he'd throw coffee at a wrestler on national TV. For years, people wondered, was this all planned genius? Or just a disturbed mind? The mystery is finally solved now. Andy Kaufman was born on January 17, 1949, in New York City. He grew up in Great Neck, Long Island, the oldest of 3 kids in a middle-class Jewish home. His father sold jewelry, and his mother had once been a fashion model. From the outside, everything looked normal. But inside the Kaufman house, Andy was already showing signs he was different. At just 3 years old, he would sit by the window for hours, silently staring out. His parents took him to psychiatrists, hoping to understand why their little boy seemed so distant. But Andy wasn't broken. He was just living in a world of his own. He didn't speak much, but his imagination was loud. Down in the family den, he would shut the door, crank up the music, and pretend to be on stage. By the time he was 5, he had created an entire imaginary TV studio in his bedroom. This wasn't kid stuff. Andy treated his fake broadcasts like they were real. He believed cameras were always filming him. His mother even placed a record player by his crib, and baby Andy figured out how to drop the needle on the vinyl himself. Music wasn't just sound, it was part of the show. He lived inside his imagination, and that imaginary world felt more real than anything else. By the time he was 9, Andy wasn't just performing for himself, he was getting paid. He put up signs at supermarkets offering birthday party shows for $5. He called himself Uncle Andy and put on wild performances with magic tricks, puppet shows, 16mm films, and party games. His grandfather gave him the equipment, and Andy made sure no adults were allowed during his shows. At 14, he was already a small-time performer with a strange sense of control. One time, he even recorded a song with his grandfather inside a phono booth at Kitty City in Queens. It was called "Strummin' on Me Old Guitar." This wasn't just a hobby. Andy was already building the foundations of what would become one of the weirdest and most unforgettable careers in comedy. He also had a deep love for Elvis Presley. In his teen years, Andy spent hours locked in the basement, blasting Elvis records and perfecting every move, every shake, every word. He didn't just want to impersonate Elvis, he wanted to become him. At 20, he hitchhiked 2,500 miles to Las Vegas, carrying pages of handwritten notes about Elvis. He had no money, so he hid in a storage room for over 8 hours, waiting for Elvis to walk by. Nobody knows exactly what happened when they met, but years later, Elvis himself said Andy was his favorite impersonator. And when Andy did the routine live on Johnny Carson's show in 1977, it brought the house down. He started as a bumbling foreigner, then ripped off his costume to reveal the king, perfect in every detail. But while most kids his age were chasing rock stars, Andy was also watching wrestling. He became obsessed with the way bad guys in the ring could make crowds hate them on purpose. His favorite was Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. Andy saw wrestling not just as a sport, but as a performance where villains controlled the audience. He told Jerry Lawler years later, "I was a fan of the bad guys. He loved how they could be booed and still be stars." That idea, being disliked on purpose, stuck with him. It shaped how he saw performance. Not every reaction had to be applause. Sometimes, confusion and anger meant you were doing something right. In 1968, Andy enrolled at Graham Junior College in Boston to study television performance. There, he created a bizarre closed-circuit TV show called Uncle Andy's Fun House. One episode featured a fake guest named Gail Slobodkin, whom Andy told had no future in show business. The show ended with her suicide. But Gail never existed. It was one of his first public hoaxes. He also finished a strange book called God, originally titled Gosh, which wouldn't be published until decades after his death. During college, he also started riding to New York with a fellow student who would later become famous too, Jay Leno. That same year, something else happened that changed Andy forever. He discovered transcendental meditation. While other students partied, Andy meditated for 3 hours a day. He later said it was the reason he could do everything he did. It gave him focus, calm, and confidence. In 1971, he traveled to Mallorca, Spain, for 5 months to become a certified TM teacher. At a time when most young comedians were chasing agents and nightclub gigs, Andy was learning how to clear his mind. That spiritual discipline let him take creative risks no one else dared to try. But while all of this was happening, something very private was unfolding. At age 20, Andy became a father. His high school girlfriend had a baby girl named Maria. They placed her for adoption. Andy never talked about it. Maria grew up in a blue-collar home, knowing she was adopted but never knowing who her real father was. She didn't find out until 1992, 8 years after Andy died from lung cancer. She was 24 when she met his family. Although Andy never knew his daughter, she eventually became part of the Kaufman family. Her existence added another strange, emotional twist to a life already full of mystery. By 1971, Andy had made it to the New York comedy scene. Bud Friedman, owner of the legendary Improv Club, discovered him performing at a Long Island venue. Audiences didn't know what to make of him. He wasn't telling jokes. Sometimes he would read The Great Gatsby out loud. Other times he'd sing all 100 verses of 100 Bottles of Beer on the Wall. Once, he got on stage in a sleeping bag and just slept the whole time. Nobody understood it, but they couldn't stop watching. Club owners booked him because he was unforgettable, even if nobody laughed. And then came Foreign Man, a shy, high-voiced immigrant from a made-up island called Caspiar. He wore his father's old pink jacket. He mispronounced names. He did terrible impressions. The audience would groan. And then, out of nowhere, he'd rip off his clothes and become Elvis. The transformation was shocking, flawless, and hilarious. People never saw it coming. What began as a silly setup for his Elvis bit became his most famous character. Foreign Man's line, "Thank you very much," became a catchphrase. When Saturday Night Live aired its very first episode on October 11, 1975, no one knew a quiet man in a plain suit would steal the spotlight. Andy Kaufman didn't speak. He walked out, placed a record player on a table, and stood still. Then, the Mighty Mouse theme song started. He didn't move until the line, "Here I come to save the day," burst through the speakers. At that moment, he came alive, lip-syncing that one line with full energy, then returned to silence. The crowd erupted. They didn't know what just happened, but they couldn't stop laughing. It was strange, it was awkward, and it was unforgettable. Kaufman wasn't doing comedy like anyone else. He wasn't telling jokes. He was making people feel confused, and then laugh. That 90-second act made history. And it wasn't the last time he'd shake things up. Andy Kaufman didn't want to be a TV star. He hated sitcoms. But in 1978, his manager George Shapiro finally convinced him to join a new show called Taxi. Kaufman had a condition. He'd only appear in 14 episodes per season. He didn't want to be trapped. His odd little character, Latka Gravas, came from an earlier stage act called Foreign Man, inspired by his old college roommate from Iran. Kaufman also demanded something unheard of. His alter ego, Tony Clifton, had to be given his own contract, as if he were a real person. A BC agreed. To make room for Kaufman's unpredictable style, the writers made Latka a character with multiple personalities. That gave Kaufman the freedom to switch roles, becoming people like the sleazy Vic Ferrari. Even though he barely liked being there, he still earned Golden Globe nominations in 1979 and 1981. Behind the scenes, people were confused by him. But according to writer Sam Simon, Kaufman was more professional than his wild reputation suggested. Then came Tony Clifton's guest appearance. In December 1978, Kaufman cashed in on his contract clause. The Taxi producers brought Clifton on to play Louis De Palma's brother. But it was Kaufman in heavy makeup, pretending not to be himself. He showed up with two women dressed like Vegas showgirls, covered in makeup and acting like a drunk celebrity. He claimed he rewrote the script to include them. Judd Hirsch had enough. In a moment caught on Tony Danza's Super 8 camera, Hirsch shouted, "You got one show and you're off the lot." Security dragged Clifton out. A few days later, the cast watched the footage together. Kaufman, now out of costume, simply said Clifton was an asshole. Next week, he showed up on set like nothing ever happened. Andy Kaufman was already known for pushing boundaries in comedy. But from 1979 to 1983, he did something nobody expected. He became a villain in the world of professional wrestling. He didn't just play around with the idea, he went all in. He called himself the intergender wrestling champion of the world and dared any woman to beat him for $1,000. His outfit was ridiculous. Long white thermal underwear, black trunks, socks, and shoes. But his behavior was even more extreme. He stayed undefeated after wrestling more than 400 women, using cheap tricks like hair pulling and kicking. He told the audience he'd marry and shave his head for any woman who could pin him. No one ever did. He didn't just wrestle, he made sure people got angry. In interviews, he ranted about how women belonged in kitchens and weren't made for sports. He mocked the women's movement with over-the-top insults. The hate poured in. One woman in a wheelchair wrote she'd gladly run him over. Another threatened to beat him into a bloody mess. But Andy didn't break character. His girlfriend Lynn Margulies later published a book filled with those letters called Dear Andy Kaufman, I Hate Your Guts. He even explained in a documentary that he played his role like a purist. If I'm a bad guy, I play it to the hilt. But it wasn't just a one-man act. Andy wanted a bigger stage. He tried joining the WWF, but Vince McMahon Sr. turned him down. So, in late 1981, Kaufman teamed up with Memphis wrestling star Jerry the King Lawler. He made fun of Memphis, called it a redneck capital, and even aired videos teaching locals how to use soap. The audience hated him. One night, during a match with a female wrestler named Foxy, Lawler shoved him away after he refused to let go of a pin. That moment lit the fuse. Now Andy was going to face a man. The feud began, and yet the whole thing was fake, but nobody knew. Behind the scenes, Kaufman and Lawler were close friends. They carefully planned every detail, but never broke character. Not in public, not in interviews, not even years later. Kaufman got paid like a main event star for 2 years, but he never cashed a single check. Lawler later said that was how much Andy loved the game. Everything boiled over on April 5, 1982. 10,000 fans packed the Mid-South Coliseum. During the match, Lawler slammed Kaufman twice with pile drivers, a dangerous move that drops the opponent straight onto their head. Andy lay there, totally still, for 20 minutes. Then came the stretcher. He had called a real ambulance and paid for it himself. Garbage rained from the stands as he was taken away. He spent 3 days in the hospital in real traction. Nurses believed it was real. The New York Times ran it as legit news. Photos by Bill Apter showed Andy in pain, his neck in a brace, and the story ran coast to coast. He fooled everyone, but Kaufman wasn't done. On July 28, 1982, he and Lawler appeared on Late Night with David Letterman. At first, it looked like a simple interview. Then things exploded. Lawler mocked Kaufman's neck brace, saying it looked like a flea collar. Kaufman yelled back. Letterman tried to calm them. Suddenly, Lawler stood up and slapped Andy hard across the face. The audience gasped. Andy flew out of his chair. Lawler said he didn't plan it. "I didn't know I was gonna slap him until I did." That moment became TV history. After the commercial break, things got even wilder. Kaufman lost it. He shouted curses, stormed around the stage, called Lawler an asshole over and over, and even threw coffee at him. Letterman looked stunned. NBC censors struggled to bleep everything. It felt raw, chaotic, and completely real. Viewers weren't sure if it was a breakdown or a brilliant act. Letterman later said, "You can say those words, but you can't throw coffee." That night, wrestling crossed into mainstream pop culture. Photos of the slap hit newspapers everywhere. The New York Times reported on Kaufman's injuries as if it were a true sports incident. They quoted doctors and managers. They believed every word. The line between fiction and reality had vanished. Wrestling fans and average viewers alike were all sucked in. One of the most unforgettable nights in his career happened on April 26, 1979. That's when Kaufman performed at Carnegie Hall. The show wasn't just strange, it was massive. He started with stunts like bringing Robin Williams on stage dressed as his grandmother. Nobody noticed it was him until the end. Then Kaufman staged a fake death. An old woman collapsed on stage. Everyone panicked until Kaufman came out in a Native American headdress and danced over her to bring her back to life. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or leave, but the real twist came after the show. Kaufman looked out at the audience and said, "You've all been very good. Now, I want to take you out for milk and cookies." And he meant it. He hired 24 buses and spent over $20,000 to bring the entire crowd to the School of Printing. There, they were served famous Amos cookies and cream o' land milk, while being entertained by clowns, jugglers, and even rock bands. As if that wasn't enough, he told the crowd the third half of his act would happen the next day at the Staten Island Ferry, and 300 people actually showed up. This kind of absurdity was exactly what Kaufman lived for. In 1983, he released My Breakfast with Blassie, a strange parody of the quiet art film My Dinner with Andre. Instead of deep philosophical talk, Kaufman sat in a Hollywood Sambo's restaurant eating breakfast with professional wrestler Freddie Blassie. They talked about germs. They talked about fame. They got interrupted by weird fans, played by his girlfriend Lynn Margulies and longtime co-conspirator Bob Zamuda. The whole film was improvised. It didn't have punchlines. It made people uncomfortable. But it also became a cult classic. And like everything else Kaufman did, it blurred the line between performance and real life. Around the same time, Kaufman tried something bigger. He moved to Broadway. He teamed up with Debbie Harry from Blondie to launch a stage show about professional wrestling. It was wild, but it was also a complete disaster. The show opened and closed on the same night. Critics hated it. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. And just like that, his Broadway dream was over. It wasn't just a bad review. It was one more sign that the mainstream had no idea what to do with him. Saturday Night Live banned him after fans voted him off the show. His movies flopped. His wrestling act, especially his women's wrestling champion character, turned more people away than it brought in. That Broadway failure was a loud and painful crash. But what really broke him came from a place he had always trusted. For years, Kaufman had followed transcendental meditation. It brought him peace. It was a spiritual anchor. But when he applied for advanced training, the organization rejected him. They said his wrestling persona was too offensive. His friend Bob Zamuda compared the moment to a devout Catholic being kicked out of the church. Kaufman was crushed. This wasn't just another critic. This was a group he believed in, one he thought understood him, but even they didn't. At the same time, his film career collapsed completely. In 1981, he starred in Heartbeeps, a romantic comedy where he played a valet robot in love with another robot, played by Bernadette Peters. The film cost $12 million. It earned just over $2.1 million. Critics tore it apart. Universal Pictures hated the original cut so much that they fired the director and re-edited it. Even though the film's makeup earned an Oscar nomination, nothing could save it. Kaufman himself was embarrassed. He went on Late Night with David Letterman and offered to refund anyone who had seen the movie. Letterman replied, "You'd better have change for a 20." That was the biggest laugh the movie ever got. The failure killed any chance of Kaufman doing more films. Universal pulled the plug on the Tony Clifton story, a movie about Kaufman's most bizarre alter ego. That was it. His time in Hollywood was done. He never starred in a film again. Andy Kaufman was known as wild, unpredictable, and sometimes even offensive. But behind the scenes, he lived a life that few could have imagined. While the public saw a man who wrestled women and played rude characters, the real Andy spent 3 hours every single day doing yoga and meditation. He first discovered transcendental meditation in 1969 while still in college. By 1971, he had become a certified TM teacher. Meditation wasn't just a habit for him, it became the center of his life. His commitment grew stronger during a retreat in Switzerland in the 1970s, where he spent 2 months with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. They didn't just meditate, they talked about comedy, beauty, and what it means to create something real. Kaufman believed that the focus and peace he found in meditation helped him stay grounded. It also helped him fight off problems with drugs that had troubled him when he was younger. Friends from Fairfield, Iowa, the heart of TM practice in America, said that meditation gave him strength and helped him become who he truly was. A filmmaker who studied Kaufman's life even said meditation and performance were the same for Andy. Both meant blocking out the world and being completely present. In 1982, something unexpected happened. While filming a small movie called My Breakfast with Blassie, Kaufman met Lynn Margulies. She wasn't an actress, just a regular person sitting at a nearby table in a diner. But Andy walked up to her, in character, and introduced himself on camera. She joked that she was married to someone in prison. Andy later whispered to his friend, Fred Blassie, "I'm terrible with names." Blassie replied, "Just remember, she's the one with the legs." That random meeting turned into a real relationship. From that day until his death in 1984, Lynn was by his side. She saw a different side of him. They weren't just romantic partners, they worked together too. Sometimes, just for fun, Andy would pretend to strangle her at red lights, while other drivers looked on in shock. It was all part of the act, but in private, he trusted her deeply. Years later, she shared something he had kept secret during his lifetime: that Andy was bisexual but didn't want the world, or even his parents, to know until they were gone. She kept that promise until after they passed. That's what made Andy Kaufman so hard to define. On stage, he could be loud, rude, even disturbing. But at home, he was thoughtful and soft-spoken. He was a vegan. He didn't drink or smoke. He cared about health and peace, except when he became Tony Clifton. Then he'd do everything he normally avoided: drink whiskey, smoke cigars, and eat steaks. But that was the character, not the man. People close to him said his act wasn't about being mean, it was about joy. Pure joy in doing something unexpected. Even his most offensive performances weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to shake people up, to make them think. Lynn always said that deep down, Andy was one of the kindest people she had ever known. Behind the scenes, his health was declining too. It started with a cough, just a stubborn, dry cough that wouldn't go away. Andy Kaufman was having dinner with his family on Long Island in November 1983 when they noticed it. He had been coughing for nearly a month, but when they asked about it, he shrugged it off. He told them a doctor said it was nothing. But it wasn't going away, it was getting worse. Back in Los Angeles, he finally went to Cedars-Sinai for another opinion. Some of his friends didn't even believe him. This was Andy Kaufman, after all. A man who had built a career on tricking audiences, turning lies into performances, making people question what was real. They thought it was just another bit, but it wasn't. On December 11th, 1983, the doctors gave him the truth. It was lung cancer, large-cell carcinoma, and it was serious. The diagnosis shocked everyone, especially because Andy had lived so clean. He hadn't smoked since high school. He was a vegetarian. He didn't drink. Even when he played Tony Clifton, who always had a cigarette in hand, Andy never inhaled. The doctors guessed years of performing in smoky clubs might have caught up to him. Secondhand smoke, night after night, show after show. The cancer was already advanced. He didn't even tell his parents until February 1984. Andy was only 35. He tried everything: chemotherapy, radiation, strict diets, but nothing worked. He got desperate. In March 1984, he flew to the Philippines. He had heard of a man named Jun Labo, a so-called psychic surgeon. This man claimed to pull tumors out of people's bodies with his bare hands. No tools, no scars. Andy stayed there for 6 weeks, getting treated twice a day. His friend Bob Zmuda was there. He saw Andy, frail and bald from chemo, sitting in a room with other patients, all stripped to their underwear, waiting for their turn. Labo would reach into their chests, pretend to pull out blood and chunks of cancer, then close them up with a prayer. Andy said he felt better for a while, but it didn't last. When he got back to the United States, his health crashed. By early 1984, it was impossible to ignore. In his last shows, people were shocked by how he looked. Thin, pale, almost unrecognizable. When fans asked what was wrong, he just said he had a health problem and was trying natural treatments. In March, he showed up at the premiere of My Breakfast with Blassie. He had a mohawk, not for style, but to cover the hair loss from radiation. Photos from that night told the whole story. His face was hollow. His frame looked fragile. The next day, he flew out for more treatments. By April, he needed a wheelchair. He couldn't stand on his own. People who didn't know still thought it might be a stunt. Too far this time, they whispered. But Andy wasn't acting anymore. On May 16, 1984, at 6:27 p.m., Andy Kaufman died in Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The cancer had spread to his brain. He was surrounded by friends and family. He was just 35. His body was taken to Beth David Cemetery in Elmont, New York. But even in death, Andy left people guessing. Some thought it was fake. Some still think it was fake. He had joked about faking his death before. Fans reported sightings. Stories spread. The 1999 movie Man on the Moon even hinted he might still be out there.